Hi, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am finishing off my series, my 4-part video series of finishing my Renaissance Fair costume. If you missed the last 3 parts, let me just give you a recap of them. In the last video, I made the blue velvet overdress. In the video before that, I made the petticoat and the undersleeves. And in the video before that, I told you my design plan and I made the smock. If you missed any of those videos, go ahead and go back to them and catch up, and let's get started. So today's video is all of the leftover bits to finish my project. I'm starting off with something that's not technically a visual embellishment, but I'm a modern woman and I need pockets. And Renaissance nobility typically didn't wear bags or anything, so what I'm doing instead to have the best of both worlds is I'm making detachable pockets. So basically just 2 pockets tied around my waist, that's it. First thing I need to do is cut out 4 of these potato shapes. I'm slicing 2 of these down about 6 inches or so, enough for me to slide my phone and my wallet in. And then I'm adding a contrasting bias around the slit I just made. Now I'm basting the front and the backs to each other, wrong sides together. And then I'm also adding bias binding around those, except for the top. I'm cutting out bias binding that's large enough to tie around my waist comfortably. And I'm placing the pockets so that they're spaced where I want them to be, so the sides. And that's why I made those slits before, so that I can actually stick my hands through the overgown into the pockets. I'm finishing the bias binding by stitching all the way and making sure that I get the pockets real secure when I get to the pocket parts. So these are gonna go on top of the green petticoat and underneath the overgown. So I got a bunch of gold, blue, and green trims to use, but I just felt like it wasn't substantial enough. Like, they're pretty skinny. So to make them more substantial, I decided I'm taking this creamy fabric that kind of looks like a similar family to the green tablecloth, and I'm making tubes, and basically I'm gonna do a little layering moment of the trims on top of it. I just feel like the white contrasting with the dark blue and the gold on top is just gonna make those trims stand out even more. So what I'm doing is I'm just sewing these strips into tubes, and then I'm attaching the trim on these white tubes. I'm also prepping one green one to use on my French hood later on, so that I have some of that green up top. I'm also adding this gold and rhinestone one and hand stitching it using invisible thread. So I used some poster board paper to make my pattern, and I kind of just fiddled around with it until it looked the way I wanted to make. And I'm using these images kind of as my inspiration. Apparently Anne Boleyn was known for popularizing French hoods in the Tudor era, so that's why I'm going with it. I'm using felt and interfacing as the base to add a bit of structure without making it hard. And then I'm adding some boning to add additional structure so that it doesn't flop around and stays straight. I'm using that same pattern to cut out fabrics to essentially make like a cover for my base shapes. The bottom is going to be white and the top is going to be velvet. So another reason I wanted to use felt and interfacing is so I could still sew through it easily. So I'm just adding a gold trim around the front part that frames my face. Now I'm hand stitching the blue piece to the white piece, and I'm using a nice thick thread. I'm not too concerned on how much it's showing because I'm just gonna cover it with trim anyway. And now I'm just attaching a ton of trim to zhuzh it up. To keep it on my head, I'm adding a chin strap. Now, I could have added elastic, but like I said in a previous video, I'm really trying to avoid using stretchy materials for this project. So I'm just using some ribbon thingy that I had that isn't stretchy. And then I immediately use stretchy fabric for the black part of the hood because that's all I had that looked right and had the right flow that I wanted. Oh well, what can you do? I tried really hard not to use any stretch fabric. But the nice thing about using this fabric is I didn't have to hem the bottom because typically stretch knits don't fray, so that was nice. And I'm hand stitching it to the back of the white piece. Now it's time for the dress. So I felt like the shoulders and the waist weren't substantial, you know? So I wanted to add a little bit of something, and I've seen these pictures of like squares on, it's like Renaissance era garments, and I thought, let's just slap those on. So I still had some of the blue velvet fabric, so I just cut out a bunch of these squares and sewed them and made little pockets essentially. Also, I'm making the waist ones slightly bigger than the shoulder ones. Now that they're all made, I'm basting them together so that they're in a nice little row and it's easier to work with when I attach them to the dress. I was a little bit concerned about running the dress through my machine, so I ended up just hand stitching the ones on the shoulders. For the waist, I took it to my machine and it was fine. So after this, I was like, no problem. And the dress is already so heavy at this point with all of it's velvet. It's just so heavy. So I'm really excited about wearing it for the Ren Faire. Hopefully it won't be miserable, but it is what it is. I'm gonna look beautiful. Again, for attaching the squares, I don't need it to look perfect because I'm just gonna be covering it with trim. To stop the edges of the trim from fraying, I put some fray check on it, and that should hopefully help it from fraying more. And then of course, now I'm like, it's fine to use the machine for my sleeves. So I'm using the machine for my sleeves now. Pinning this thick trim was really difficult, so what I ended up doing is attaching some Wonder Tape to keep it in place while I sewed it. For the gold trim across the top of the bodice, I ended up folding it over onto itself to finish it off just because it's like right there. It's right in your face. So I wanted to make sure it was pretty. I wasn't happy with just stitching over the edges of the trim, so in the places where it was more noticeable, I just ended up attaching these little flowers for a cute little detail. A lesson for us all: just cover mistakes with flowers. I never finished the laces for the sides. I'm whipping the ends using embroidery thread. Last thing I'm doing is I'm attaching pearls. This strand was perfect for the front. And this was actually my grandma's old broken bracelet from forever ago that I kept forever. And I'm really happy that I finally have a place to use it. I started off thinking I was going to stitch every single bead or stitch the strands, but it's just At this point, with all of the trim and all of the layers, it was just really hard to stitch through, and I was also kind of running out of time. So I ended up just gluing them. It mostly held up. You'll see in the reveal video. And now it's time for the final reveal. Tell me what you think about my costume. I really hope you enjoyed this video series. I had a blast making this really big project. I'll see you in my next video.